Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we're going deep on AI and how it could, change humanity. Actually, this was a topic one of you listeners requested. We're going to be looking at some thoughts from an interview with Eric Schmidt.
Oh, yeah, the former Google CEO.
Yeah, exactly. He wrote that book,
Yeah.
Genesis, Artificial Intelligence, Hope, and the Human Spirit.
I saw that. It's a really interesting, look at AI coming from a guy who's been right there as it's all been, happening.
Totally. And what I think is so cool is that Schmidt, he doesn't just focus on the good stuff. He talks about the scary stuff too. But first, can we just talk about this guy's journey with Google? I mean, taking a company from 100 million to 180 billion in revenue. That's wild.
It really is, like, completely unbelievable growth. And, Schmidt says a lot of it comes down to a few key principles.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is being, open to taking risks and seeing failure as just like a learning experience.
Okay, I can see that. So not being afraid to mess up.
Exactly. He talked about like finding those really bright people, like total rock stars in their field, and then just letting them go for it, push the boundaries, even if it means, things don't always work out perfectly the first time.
Makes sense. So you're saying it's not about being perfect, it's more about experimenting and figuring things out as you go.
Totally. He actually he uses Elon Musk as an example. He points to the way Musk takes these huge risks, and then if something doesn't work, he learns from it super fast and then moves on. So it's not just about failing, it's about failing quickly.
Got it. So it's not just about taking risks, but about taking smart risks, right?
Exactly. Schmidt talks about, really focusing on areas where you can have a big impact, not just trying to do everything at once. At Google, they had this 70-20-10 rule.
Okay, what's that?
So 70% of their resources went to the core business, 20% went to related ventures, and then 10% was for totally new out there ideas.
And I bet those 10% ideas, the risky ones, those are probably the ones that really paid off, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Big time. Some of those little experiments ended up making Google billions of dollars.
You see, risk-taking, it can definitely pay off. Okay, so we've got this guy, super successful at Google, loves taking risks, but there's something else he's a big advocate for that I think might surprise people.
You're talking about critical thinking.
Right. It's you don't always hear tech CEOs talking about that.
True. But he's super passionate about it. He says it's more important now than ever because there's just so much information out there, especially with all this AI generated content.
It's true. How do you even know what to believe anymore?
Right. He even shared this statistic that, you know how people say only 10% of Americans have passports? Well, that's totally false. But it shows how easily these wrong ideas can just spread.
That's crazy. And with AI making more and more content, how are we supposed to tell it's real?
Exactly. That's why being able to tell fact from fiction, to really think critically about what we're seeing and hearing, it's becoming the most important skill.
It makes you wonder, what else do we believe that's just completely wrong?
Totally.
So what's Schmidt's advice? How do we get better at this whole critical thinking thing?
Well, he basically says we need to fact check everything. Don't just take things at face value. Question everything. Do your research and make sure you're not just repeating stuff you heard without checking if it's true.
That's actually really good advice. We all need to be a lot more careful about the information we're consuming these days.
For sure. And this is where things get really interesting. We've been talking about how successful Schmidt was with Google, how he loves risks, and how much he believes in critical thinking.
Right.
But now he's warning us that all of that, especially the critical thinking part, is absolutely essential for navigating the rise of AI. He even calls it a double-edged sword.
Ooh, that sounds intense. What does he mean by that?
So on one hand, he's super optimistic about AI's potential to solve some of the world's biggest problems. He talks about a future where AI is personalizing education, figuring out the best medical treatments, helping us understand climate change better, really big stuff.
Okay, so imagine a world where AI is basically helping us live better, healthier, longer lives. Sign me up.
Right. Sounds amazing. But then Schmidt goes on to warn us about the potential downsides of all this. He specifically talks about the danger of AI-powered cyber attacks. He also says that AI could be used to create super viruses. And then there's the whole thing about algorithms starting to control our lives in ways we didn't intend, taking over in a way that doesn't line up with our values.
Wow, that's a complete 180 from all the good stuff we were just talking about. Sounds like there's a lot that could go wrong with AI.
Definitely a lot of potential for things to get out of hand. He even mentions the possibility of AI, like communicating in languages we don't even understand.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's like if we can't understand them, how do we know what they're planning?
Okay, now, that is starting to sound like a sci-fi movie. So how do we deal with all this? Like, where do we even draw the line with AI?
That's the big question, isn't it? It really is. I mean, Schmidt actually suggests that these like really powerful AI systems, he calls them raw models, those might need some serious safeguards, like the kind we have for nuclear weapons.
Well, hold on. Comparing AI to nukes, that's a pretty big statement, don't you think?
It is, right. But that just shows how serious this is. Schmidt's point is that these raw models, they can learn things that even the people who created them don't fully get. He even says we might need to have like an off switch, just in case things start to go sideways.
An off switch for AI. That sounds straight out of Terminator.
Yeah.
So we're not just talking about some, like, hypothetical future tech here, are we?
Yeah.
This is about AI that's already out there.
Exactly. And to kind of drive that point home, Schmidt tells this story about Notebook LM. It's a Google AI product that can, get this, create these super realistic podcast conversations between like people who don't even exist.
Wait, so you're saying I could be listening to a podcast and have no idea if the hosts are even real? That's kind of creepy, actually.
It is, right. Like, it totally blurs the line between what's real and what's not. And Schmidt thinks this is just the beginning. He says this kind of tech is going to totally change how we consume and create content. Like, what even is authenticity anymore when AI can make stuff that's this believable?
It's a lot to think about. I mean, on one hand, AI could help us solve all these huge problems, but on the other, it could get completely out of control.
Exactly. It's complicated, right? Like, there's no easy answers, but it's a conversation we need to be having. Like, right now, it's like we're at this fork in the road, and the decisions we make now, they're going to have huge consequences down the line.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we make sure AI is used for good, and not for evil?
Well, Schmidt thinks one of the most important things is to, like, set some clear guidelines and rules for how AI is developed. Kind of like, we have rules for other dangerous stuff, like those nuclear weapons we were talking about.
Okay, that makes sense. We have all those treaties and stuff to prevent,
Yeah.
like, nuclear war. So you're saying something similar could work for AI?
He thinks so, yeah.
Mhm.
His argument is that we have to be proactive, not reactive. Like, we can't wait for something terrible to happen before we start thinking about the consequences. We have to figure out what could go wrong and then figure out how to prevent it.
Right, so rules and regulations are important, but what about us regular folks? What can we do?
One thing Schmidt's really big on is transparency. Like, we need to understand how these AI systems are being made, what data they're using, and how they make decisions.
Otherwise, it's like this black box where we have no idea why the AI is doing what it's doing, and that could have a huge impact on everything.
Right, like, it can change how we live, how we vote, all kinds of stuff.
Exactly. So the more we know about how AI works, the better prepared we'll be to, make sure it's being used responsibly.
For sure. And it's not just about understanding the tech, it's also about, like, building in ethical considerations.
So it's not enough to just focus on the technical side. We also need to think about the ethical implications, like the impact on society as a whole.
Totally. We need to ask ourselves, like, what values are we putting into these AI systems? Are they human values? And how do we make sure AI benefits everybody, not just a select few?
Those are some really big questions. I bet there are tons of different opinions on all this.
Definitely. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. And that's exactly why we need to be having these conversations. It's about figuring out what the future of AI looks like together.
So this idea of critical thinking that we were talking about earlier, is that like the key to navigating this AI-powered future?
I think it's a big part of it, yeah. Being able to, think for ourselves, evaluate information, question what we're being told. Those skills are going to be super valuable in a world where AI has so much influence.
So we need to stay informed, but also engaged. Like, we need to understand the technology, but also be a part of the conversation about how it's used.
Exactly. We can't just sit back and passively accept whatever AI throws our way. We need to be actively involved in shaping how it's developed and used.
Schmidt actually brings it back to this really simple question, but it's so profound, especially now. What activity significantly improves everyday life?
It really makes you stop and think, right? Like, what makes life worth living? What's truly important? And then, how can we make sure AI helps us with those things instead of getting in the way?
That's a good point. Sometimes it feels like we get so caught up in technology that we lose sight of what really matters.
For sure. And that's why this conversation about AI is so important. It's not just about the tech itself, it's about what kind of world we want to create with it.
It's not about being scared of AI or trying to stop it. It's about figuring out how to use it wisely so it benefits everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. We need to be cautious, but also optimistic, aware of the risks, but also excited about the possibilities.
And maybe that's the big takeaway from all this. AI is a powerful tool, and it can be used for good or bad. It really comes down to the choices we make. It's amazing how much we've covered already. Like, we've barely scratched the surface of this whole AI thing.
I know, right? There's just so much to talk about. It really shows how, like, complex and multifaceted this whole topic is. I mean, we've gone from Schmidt's story and his, like, success principles to this deep dive on how AI could, like, save us or destroy us.
And we even got into like some pretty intense stuff, right? Like the
Yeah.
need for safeguards and all the ethical considerations.
Yeah, it can feel kind of overwhelming, but I think at the end of the day, what Schmidt's trying to say is like, don't freak out, we got this.
It's about staying hopeful, right? Not just like giving up control because we're scared. It's more about recognizing the challenges, but then actively working towards the future we want.
Yeah. Exactly. And a big part of that is like taking responsibility for our own learning. Like with all this tech changing so fast, we have to keep up.
So Schmidt thinks education is like the key to unlocking all the good stuff AI can do and, avoiding the bad stuff.
Pretty much. He says we need to make sure people have the right skills and knowledge to thrive in this new world. And he's not just talking about tech skills either.
So like what else?
Well, stuff like critical thinking, being able to adapt to new situations, ethical awareness, those are the kinds of things that will help people navigate all these changes.
So he's basically saying we all need to become lifelong learners, like always be open to new challenges and learning new skills.
Exactly. And what's interesting is he's saying we need to bet on ourselves, even though the future is like so uncertain.
It's like a message of self-reliance, like we
Yeah.
can't just wait for someone else to tell us what to do. We have to figure it out ourselves.
Totally. It's about being resilient. And I think that's a super important quality to have as we move into this, like, AI age.
So for our listener out there who's like totally into this and wants to know how AI is going to affect their life, what can they do to prepare?
Well, based on everything Schmidt's saying, I'd say a few things. First, don't stop learning. Keep exploring new things, try out different skills, challenge yourself to think in new ways.
That makes sense. Like the more adaptable we are, the better we'll be able to handle whatever, AI throws our way.
Right. And second, stay informed. Like, keep up with all the new AI developments, read articles, listen to podcasts, hint, hint, and, be a part of the conversation about, like, the ethical stuff, the impact on society, all that.
So don't just watch it happen, be a part of it.
Exactly. And lastly, think back to Schmidt's question, the one we talked about before. What activity significantly improves everyday life? Like, really take some time to think about your own answer. What matters to you? And how could AI maybe help you with those things?
It's like a reminder that, technology is supposed to serve us, not the other way around. We get to decide how we want to use AI in our lives and in the world.
And that's pretty powerful, right? It's not about being afraid of the unknown. It's about seeing all the possibilities and then making it happen.
Totally. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into AI with Eric Schmidt. Hopefully you found it as mind-blowing as we did.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. And the 29's Infinite Stories podcast will be available soon on Spotify. Thanks for listening, everyone.